5:43. And this will be an interesting meeting. So I guess first thing we'll do, do we have to do attendance or anything?
That's number 3.
Oh, okay. So first thing we'll do is Pledge of Allegiance. Okay. Determination of a quorum. I think we have everyone except Bailey, who you're still trying to get a hold of. But do you have an internet connection now?
Madam Chair, Mr. Thompson is on vacation, and he had asked for a link to be sent for the meeting, and if his time worked out, he was going to participate, but we're not sure. But we did send the link, and if he joins, we'll let you know.
Okay. All right, item number 4, approval of the meeting agenda. Does anyone have modifications to the agenda? Going, gone. So I think we officially approved the agenda. Okay, approval of the minutes. The minutes are from December. A little trip down memory lane. Did anyone have comments on the minutes? Comments? I didn't have any comments. So I guess we need a motion.
A motion that we approve the December minutes.
We have a second?
Second.
Do we all have to be in favor? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
I abstain.
Oh, that's fair. Okay. So the minutes are approved. All right, committee reports and commissioner comments. Well, as today's commissioner, I don't have any comments, but does anyone have a committee report?
Well, I do.
Okay, good.
So I attended the Economic Development Committee on Tuesday, and we learned the progress that they're making with the downtown Main Street designation, and wanted to report that they have received a grant from the Timmons Group, and I understand that the perimeters of that grant have been extended to include Colonial Avenue. So that's really exciting news, that the beautification and all the impacts that are going to be happening will include that area as well. We heard of the parking study that was done in #22 by the town, and some comments on that were that that study at that time was primarily to look at metered parking in town, and they focused on 2 areas, not town-wide. So in many ways, they were saying that that study was not really relevant to overall parking for our purposes in terms of ordinances. That they're also applying for the Heritage, Northern Neck Heritage Grant. So that's it.
What is the Heritage Northern Neck?
I don't know, but I think, I don't know. It's just a small grant. I think they said it was 30 or 40,000, so it's not a big grant.
Every little bit helps, right?
You betcha.
Okay.
And Nigel was at the meeting as well, if you wanted to add anything.
No,
Okay.
I think that's fine. I received a copy of that 2022 planning parking survey, and I did go through it very quickly. I don't think it has a lot of relevance to zoning applications, probably more relevant to the town council when they come to review parking costs. No idea.
I could hear you.
It is now.
Oh, yeah, we can hear
Yeah.
you better.
Well, not only that, but the microphones have to be on for the streaming service to pick it up.
I have a copy of the 2022 parking report. I don't think it's too relevant to the Planning Commission because it covers public parking issues and costs, not zoning requirements for parking, which I think is our focus.
Okay. Anything else?
The capital improvement plan committee will fire back up next month at the conclusion of this budget cycle, and we're going to start all over again. So that's something fun to dive into next month.
Isn't it on here somewhere? No, I guess not. Yeah, number 8. Okay. And I have the resiliency committee, and I do not have any updates, and I probably need to follow up with Rick and see what's happening there, so. Okay, that's it for committee reports. Do we have anyone who's on the list to make public comments?
Madam Chair, we have one speaker, Michael Bile.
Okay,
So officially open public hearing.
The public hearing at the time, and list the time.
oh, okay, so we're opening it at
Actually, it's
public
public comment.
comment, not public hearing. Public comment, then at 5:50. Yeah, please tell us who you are and where you live.
Okay, I'm Mike Bile. I live in 3300 Stratford Street in Colonial Beach, and I own CB Train Junction at 509 Colonial Avenue.
Okay, and there is a 3-minute limit.
3-minute limit. I'll try to keep it under. I took some time. I should point out that I'm a professional civil engineer as well. As I reviewed the Article 13 draft, I found that, in general, I think it addresses a lot of needs, but I think it could be improved. I think the table that's in Section 13-8 does not include several existing uses in town, and I think it should. Things like bars, taverns, barber shops, salons, spas, breweries aren't covered. They aren't listed in the parking requirements. I think those should be addressed. My biggest issue is with...
Can I interrupt?
Yeah.
For a minute, because we are gonna have a working meeting about this later on the agenda. Do we wanna have him stay?
Yeah.
So, Mr. Bile, we're going to go through the business that we have, and then you're going to have an opportunity as part of the overall parking discussion at the work session to offer these points to us that you're talking about now, and then we'll have the board so we can write those down, which we would like to do, and have some dialogue back and forth if we need to. So unless you really want to go through each of your points right now, we're going to give you that time under the item 9.2 of the agenda, the commissioner and stakeholder work session
Okay.
on parking.
My only concern with this is timing. I have to be somewhere at 7.
Okay,
So...
That's fine.
That's fine,
if
then
we
you
could-
can
Yeah,
keep
go
going.
ahead, then.
We are having a working session,
Okay.
that's
Well, I
all.
can give you a copy of this too. I've written it all down, so.
Okay.
So you have these, you don't have to just remember what I said. My biggest concerns are with Section 13-5F. I think they seem inconsistent with the nature of the town in general. The intent of the requirements to me is not clear. It seems like they were just ripped from some suburban criteria somewhere and not really focused on what this town is like. I think one of the things that this town is known for, and its claim to fame, is the fact that, it's a quaint, historic, eclectic, architecturally, as it lays out. To come up with some kind of uniform plantings around all of our parking lots, I don't think that serves us well in terms of how it makes the town appear. We already have an issue in town with unused buildings, and this is not going to help that situation, because some of those buildings already don't have parking for any uses that they might want to do. So how do we deal with that? There's limited amounts of space, and if you take the limited space that they have, I mean, one of my biggest issues is where the tree requirements are. If you have less than 10 spaces, you have to have 2 trees and a low bush. I said, where are you going to put those? If you only have room for, if you got 3 spaces, room for 3 spaces, and you put a tree in there, you got room for nothing. So I think we need to think this through, as well as think about the downtown nature that we want to have. Downtowns are characterized by the buildings up on the street, makes it easy walkability. The only way you're going to comply with a lot of these requirements is to have your parking lot in your front and your building set back, because you're going to use up all your real estate in the driveway going around back and all those plantings back there where no one can see them. So this is more like a strip center kind of requirement for the plantings. So, and especially for small properties. I mean, I look at my property, I've got, I think I have 6 spaces in back of my building. If I have to put islands in there with trees, I might have 3 spaces left. So it's like, how do you make this work in the, we've got these small lot sizes in town, a lot of existing buildings that we want to reuse. We need to really think bigger about how we deal with parking. I mean, obviously, we need to get as much in as we can, and I think that limiting it, I mean, I agree that landscaping is important, but we need to think about what the consequences of that are and what our objectives really are to achieve with that. And it's like, to me, that it doesn't seem to focus on maintaining the charm of our town. It's really just making some arbitrary, put in a bunch of stuff. And I think that it's going to really adversely affect the nature of the town and our ability to develop and bring in new businesses, because I look at my own, I'd have a hard time complying with that. So my suggestion is to take the landscaping out of this ordinance and put it out of this section and put it in section 24 with all the other landscaping where it belongs. I think it's best to have all the landscaping requirements addressed there and accommodate the parking within the landscaping requirements that you're trying to achieve, rather than have a separate set of requirements just for parking lots. Because I think that's, it can make incongruity. You're going to have, in a design basis, you're going to have conflicts between the different sections of the ordinances. So it seems to be more comprehensive to try to put it there rather than put it here. So that's the gist of my suggestions. But, I think it's important to have a vision and explain that vision for what this landscaping is supposed to do. What is it we're trying to achieve with it? We're not just arbitrarily saying you got to have 3 trees. Okay, it just says medium tree. What's a medium tree? I don't know. Put a tree and hope. What are you going to get? It's going to be all. It might be the same. It might be different. Depends on who's designing what they're going to do. And so it's going to create a whole lot of design issues and expense for the owners as well. They got to maintain these. I mean, all the trees are supposed to be put in bioswale islands. So if I've got less than 10 spaces, I'm going to put islands in my parking lot? How much space do I have? So that's my issues with that.
Okay. I think his time's up, right?
Yep. Okay.
Yes, thank you very much. But before you leave, can you tell me one more time, what is your business?
CB Train Junction.
Okay.
It's the model train shop. Sure.
Thank you. Okay, and that's there's no one else on the list, right? No. So this closes the public comment? Okay, moving right along. Number 8, old business. Update on council's action for adoption of the FY 26-30 SIP.
Madam Chair, members of the commission, let's see, council approved the 26-30 capital improvements plan, not at their June meeting, but I think it was at the April regular meeting. Isn't that correct, Mr. Wood? I believe that's correct. And so I wanted to give you an update. I may have mentioned that they had approved it last time, but I thought it was interesting that of a couple of the things that I'm sure you all probably have seen a copy of it, but there were some changes, and I would say not changes. The council was very complimentary, and I think Mr. Wood mentioned this last time, of the work that the commission did for the CIP for this time. There was a little bit of additional information that went into the plan from, as far as not only just a summary that we had prepared and put in the chart, but also, and in the appendix that you all asked for that had the money amounts broken down by fiscal year, that was added. But there was also, which we'll begin with, I think, as the committee goes forward for this coming CIP, is having the department heads not only just give us a list and a little blurb, but having a sheet that, where the department heads list the project, provide a more written justification, and then they also prioritize the items. At the last council meeting, and one of the reasons why I wanted to put this on the agenda, and Mr. Long, if you want to jump in, he was at the meeting as well. But the council went through an exercise, and through that exercise, they gave some guidance to us for next year's CIP in what constitutes a priority 1 versus a priority 2 versus a 3. You know, we had been following mostly the direction of the comprehensive plan, which identifies in the plan the type of project, like, is it health safety? Is it environmental? Is it general welfare? And so that would still be part of the exercise, but I think this, exercise that council went through also lended some additional guidance. So as we go, I'm excited about that as we go forward next year and looking at the projects, because I think it will help us work with, the committee work with department heads early on, and then the commission getting all that information and seeing if they agree. There was at the last meeting, an interesting exercise that was facilitated by the mayor that I think helped to shed light on the priorities and how they were identified, and then just going through that exercise of everyone having dots to then go around the room themselves and place dots where what projects were more of a priority in each person's opinion. So it was interesting to see that, things that staff had identified as a priority 1, or as these groups had gone through, identified as a priority 1, those are the ones that ended up with also the most number of dots. Or even if it may not have as many dots as another one of the council member dots. So everyone was, it worked out really well, and so I thought it was a very good exercise. Just wanted to share it with you as we talk about going forward for this coming year. I think all of that is very helpful information, and I don't know if Mr. Long, if you want to add anything, or Mr. Wood.
I'll start, and then we can hear from the expert on my left. I thought it was a very valuable exercise. I think making sure that the Planning Commission all understands what the Town Council thinks are their priorities will be very valuable to help a meaningful CIP originate from the Planning Commission and go to the Town Council in a collaborative way. So I think, I'm not sure how the results of that will be published in the minutes. I'm sure that's a really interesting challenge for Ms. Oliver to document all that. But the output, and even perhaps watching the section of the video of the council meeting would give us all some input on what was happening. And my other comment, which I think Mr. Wood could help us with, is since the town council has, because of the major needs of the town, has, particularly in infrastructure, identified some potential future sources of fundings for CIP projects. I think this whole CIP exercise becomes much more critical to the town, a much more valuable work that you'll be heading up, Mr. Howell. Very important, will become very important.
So just to tag along with what Mr. Long said, without overcomplicating it at this early stage, it's a way that honestly I think we're going to be more fair to you guys, because we've had a situation where town council gave you recommendations, you worked on them as best you thought you could, and then they go, nah, we need to send it back to you. This is going to give you more specific direction, so that there's not going to be so much of the volleying back and forth. And honestly, the thing that I found most encouraging about it is the fact that there are definitive ways to identify those things that should be near the top of the list. And so sharing with you guys what those things are, basically, is it life-threatening? Do we already have funding for it? Do we have to do it? And when we look at things that way, then we can identify the CIP much more organically, I guess. So I think honestly, it's gonna make y'all's life a little easier, because I think it's gonna make our lives a little easier. And that way we can come up with a good work product, hopefully the first time around, as opposed to the jockeying back and forth, right? So, that's it. Thanks, guys.
I did want to add that, in the past, we've utilized the comprehensive plan and looked at the prioritization of that, is a 10-year plan. But we've also relied on the council's strategic meeting, where you get together and in January and go through prioritization. And that really has been a critical way in the past for us to come forward with meaningful CIP.
And we addressed that actually during this, so that from your lips to whoever's ears, that's going to be part of that process.
That sounds good. Okay, nothing else on old business? We'll go to new business. So first, we kind of have a new topic. Yeah, so the amendments for Article 22. So do you want to talk about that?
Yes, ma'am. So this past year, and of course, the town is busy, during various times of the year, but with people, the town is part of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Area. Being in part of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Area, there are areas that are designated as resource protection areas where there are buffers that are to be maintained, left basically in their natural state, except for noxious weed removal and some limbing of trees for sight lines to allow for water views. And the rest of the town, the areas that are not in an RPA are in what's called an RMA, or Resource Management Area. And so in Article 22, which is our ordinance, or part of the zoning ordinance that regulates what can happen in a Chesapeake Bay preservation overlay, which all of the town is, because it's either in an RPA or it's in an RMA. Both of those areas have tree preservation requirements. And so I know you have probably heard people talk about the woodlot management permits, or people needing to get a permit from the town to remove a tree greater than 6 inches in caliber. That is true throughout the whole town. That is a requirement. What we do is, if someone comes in and says, I want a permit to remove a tree, yes, it's greater than 6 inches in caliber, measured at breast height, and generally 4 feet off the ground. For me, that's probably about chin height, but anyway, that's beside the point. So people come in and we go out and inspect the property. and say, let us take a look at the tree. If we can tell reasonably that that tree is dead, or diseased, or it's dying, then the staff will issue the permit. If we're not sure, because, well, and there are some other things too, like obstructions. We had one that needed to get removed because the roots had damaged the sewer line coming from the house of the person. So we take a look at those circumstances, and we can make a determination if we can. If we can't, then the ordinance requires that the person, a homeowner, get an arborist report that would verify, yes, that if the tree is, what's going on with the tree. The arborist does have to be a registered, certified arborist with the state. And then we, if that's the case, then we accept that and we approve the tree removal. We've had some instances where some questions have come up to us, especially over the last year, relative to when is a tree dead? Also, how much trimming can occur on a tree before it is no longer a viable tree, right? So we got into some discussions about that, and there is no definition that we have in the ordinance of tree removal. So we've decided that we're going to work, and the town attorney and I work on strengthening this area of the ordinance. There are some examples that I've looked through, but so tonight, rather than giving you here's some language, I wanted to get some input from you. I have a flyer that I'm going to pass out to each of you. It's how to kill a tree. The number one way to kill a tree is to top your tree, to encourage weak water spouts. Can I talk about those specific properties? Okay. Did y'all hear that? Did I say that right? Okay.
No, you're good.
No, I'm still concentrating on how to kill a tree.
Yes. Oh, good. So here are some ways to kill a tree. But, one of the things that's concerning to us is that is trying to educate the public, right? But also to ensure that our ordinance is clear or we can clear it up as much as possible about what we mean, like what's permitted. People ask all the time, can I trim the tree? And certainly, yes, it's healthy for trees for them to be pruned, but it's healthy for them to be pruned in a healthy way. So I'm going to share with you the things not to do. And then I have a couple of examples in ordinances. And if you all are interested, I can send you the about tree pruning. What I think that we're going to end up, which is what I've seen very similar in other ordinances, is that you can, obviously, Dominion Power goes out and trims trees we won't call them topping them, but they'll trim the tree, but they're required to have certain arborists on their staff or that they hire to go and get these trees out. Now, I'm not an expert on how they do that, but I do know that that's a requirement, because through my research, I have found that. And I know that you probably have neighbors that maybe top trees. Oftentimes, you see it done with like crepe myrtles. I don't know what kind of a species a crepe myrtle is, a tree or a shrub, but I have crepe myrtles in my yard that are not pruned, that are very tall. Very. And then you see them around in bank parking lots they're cut completely off, and then in the spring, they come back in summer and they're pretty, and they just don't get too tall. So I'm not talking about a tree like that maybe can handle it, but we need to deal with or try to protect the trees in the town. And I think our ordinance needs to be clear on what that trimming is. What I found in the other ordinances that I was getting ready to mention is that generally localities set a parameter of what percentage of the top of a tree that can be pruned. So in, some of them looks like it's like 25% of the overall crown of the tree. that can be pruned at a time, you know, so that we have healthy pruning practices. But I'll share those. I just wanted to introduce this to you, see if you all have any thoughts about it, see if you have any things that you think, you know, I have thought about this, and I'd like to share this as my input. So we can take that into consideration as we're working on more clearly defining tree trimming and pruning in the town's ordinance.
Comments?
Yeah, I've got a couple of comments and thoughts. So the focus really here is twofold. One is statutory compliance with the Chesapeake Bay Act, and then the second part of that is canopy preservation. And that's really what needs to be shouted from the hilltops. One of the important things about our lovely little town is that we are a wildlife preservation designated area. And also the benefits that we encounter from the trees for nature, wildlife, but also erosion control and things like that. So to me, the big, easy way to communicate the value of this is a really kind of pivotal around canopy preservation, and this stems from the fact that this ordinance comes up pretty regularly. Every 2 or 3 years, we end up having, for some reason or another, it comes before us because it's kind of our purview. And it's been a variety of conversations around, okay, well, what are the limits that we have to apply for the Chesapeake Bay Act? And that goes all the way down to the porous surface ratios on the lots, but also to what we have to do in remediation and replanting, because that seems to be a non-trivial burden, and looking at, you know, the reasonability of what we can do to help preserve that canopy, but also how we can be flexible in the right circumstances for accommodating some of the other needs, like was listed specifically on, you know, when it becomes intrusive on public works and infrastructure, and how can we proactively manage that in a way that, yes, we do have to remove some of these trees or trim or remediate them, but what are we going to do to offset that in a way that's not going to be overly burdensome?
And I just wanted to add that, along with what Nathan was saying, we have revisited this issue in the past, and one of the things we did a couple of years back was to ensure that for new construction, for development, that trees would have to be preserved that are not in the footprint of the build itself, over the 6-inch caliber. And, you know, as we have seen over and over, that many of these sites just clear cut the trees and there's no replacement. So I think part of what we need to be doing to preserve the tree canopy, which is so important to our town, you know, we have an exceptional tree canopy, but it is at risk. And so we need to also find ways to put teeth in to our ordinances so that if builders, you know, violate that rule, that there be consequences for that.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Well, I had a question, but first, I absolutely agree with what was said by Ms. Luna and Mr. Howell. We need to maintain tree canopy in this town. And what was done in the past year or so by some builders in abusing the trimming of trees where they were left with sticks in the ground was, I think, a serious abuse of Colonial Beach as a whole. I just wanted to ask, does the RMNA and RPA provisions also apply to the PUD area in town?
Yes, sir.
Great, thank you.
I would just ask, is this the only modification to the existing woodlot management or whatever Article 22 is called, is being proposed at this time?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I haven't read that article, but does it get into details of when you take out a tree, when the town says you can remove a tree, how it is removed?
It doesn't speak specifically to it, how it's removed. It doesn't go into that level of detail. As far as, what are you saying is like ensuring that the ground is restabilized and that kind of thing?
That's exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, the particular instance I have is that it seems like, especially in this part of town, the older parts of town, the trees were planted right on property lines. So it makes it kind of a problem where two property owners have to, agree. And in the case of a property that I part own on Hawthorne, the other party was concerned about limbs falling on and hurting their buildings. They weren't, our buildings were in no danger of being hit. But, so they paid for removing the tree from about a foot off the ground up. So we now have a stump there. It's been there for a long time. And I imagine that probably the stump is supposed to be removed too. For one thing, we're supposed to be putting, in our case, bushes in there to compensate for the loss of the tree. Well, the stump and the root structure basically take up almost all the space that we would want to put, those replacement things. But they did pay for the other part of the tree. I guess we're gonna have to pay for the stump removal, which there's a sticker shock on that, I wanna tell you.
So just to follow up on that, I guess the other thing would be, is there any kind of a time limit in terms of removing dead trees? I mean, I know of a situation where bits and pieces of a very big tree have been removed, but the tree has pretty much been dead for a very long time. And at some point, it's kind of like, well, it needs to be finished.
There's nothing currently in the ordinance that establishes a certain time frame. I do know that there are some school of thought that if you leave the roots in place, then that's better than taking them up. And that's one of the things that in the RPA buffer area that you can take out or you can trim back certain things, but they don't want you to remove the whole root system. I need to do a little bit of research because I don't know how roots of a dead tree would be helpful. But I think it's so as not to disturb, the ground
Yeah.
as much. But I've written that down, so I'll be glad to look at that.
Did you have anything, Bill? No. Okay. Okay. Is that it for our comments? So, did you think that maybe I should hit the gavel so we can figure out what we're doing for our working session?
We can take a little recess before we begin that part?
Yeah, why don't we do that? And then, if we collect as a group, are we gonna sit in the audience? I know there was a comment about not being able to really continue the recording if we do that.
Well, so I think it's, from our standpoint, as far as being able to have a dialogue back and forth, I like that. I did read the comment that said how we won't be able to hear people. I was gonna talk to Heather about, how with the new AV system, we might be more assured that we'd have clearer, hearing.
It won't pick up anything out there,
It won't?
no,
Okay,
unless somebody's close to the mic.
okay, so maybe we,
Those they pick up, but they don't pick up as well as these mics do.
well, we may have enough space up here, because we have, yeah. We could get them, I mean,
Just like-
everyone to come up
Yeah.
here, and then we could all just sit around. I think that would work.
Okay.
But
well,
yeah, if we'll
so-
take like a 10-minute maybe?
Yeah, I was gonna say, so before we do that, just to finish up, I sort of went too fast here
Okay.
on that. So as far as Article 22, then you really are gonna put a draft together and come back to the group, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And do that like next month or the month after?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, so then that, I would say, kind of concludes our formal meeting for the time being. And now we'll have a working session, and then we'll come back.
Yeah,
to
just
this.
recess.
10 minutes recess. we're just missing Bill, and he's coming back. All right, so the purpose of this discussion is to talk about parking. Everyone's favorite topic. Before we talk about specifics of parking, could we maybe talk about what it is we're trying to accomplish by revamping this ordinance? I don't think I have Darla's.
So, in other words, what does success look like for this meeting? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, more or less.
Yeah.
I guess I would just like to be clear about what is it we're trying to,
Okay, so the purpose of the work session this evening is to get input and have dialogue back and forth for the Planning Commission and for staff to receive input from any stakeholders that wanted to participate, business leaders, any citizens that want to talk specifically about the draft zoning ordinance amendment for Article 13 of the zoning ordinance, which are the parking requirements. If you recall, last spring, April, the Planning Commission had these amendments and voted to recommend approval of those amendments to council. And at the council's June meeting of last year, June 5th, I think it was, the council did not take action on the proposed parking amendments. They had sent it back to the Planning Commission for additional input and for the Planning Commission to reach out to the community to get input on the proposed changes. I've heard some of the things that were mentioned earlier about, aren't these regulations going too far? Are they accomplishing what we want them to accomplish in the town? How do these regulations affect, like, the downtown area? So I've heard some of those comments myself. But if you recall, at the work session, the joint work session that the Planning Commission and Council had in October, that was one of the items that came out of it. It was the CIP discussion, the FAR discussion, which we had a work session on, the parking, which we're now having a work session on, and then the R districts, which we know we have on our work plan to talk about. So that's why we're here, is to talk about this specific amendments to the ordinance. And I thought that we can open it up for everyone's discussion. We could, my ideas for how to kind of organize it so we're not all over the place, is maybe separating it into number one. Hold on, Mr. Long, do you want to go ahead?
What I was going to request, because although I was at the Council Planning Commission joint session, I don't think I was at, part of the group that was talking about parking specifically. Are you able to summarize what town councils could, I have the agenda, I've read both what the original was and what was proposed by the Planning Commission, but could somebody explain the concerns that the town council had, since they appoint us, about what the Planning Commission had proposed to do, in quick format, so that I'm up to speed with that part of things, which I think the others were all part of.
no, actually, it's a very good question, so.
Well, as I recall, it was just, a matter of timing, because the Economic Development Committee was coming out with parking recommendations, and it was we came out a little bit too soon with our recommendations. And so I think the idea was to involve the Economic Development Committee in that discussion and get the community input. So that had a big factor in how it all unfolded.
I agree with Ms. Luna. Will you turn your microphone on, please? Get it up close
sorry.
and personal.
So if I remember the timeline, Planning Commission submitted with staff input and vice versa. It was brought to the town council. They looked at it, Robin looked at it, There was things in there that they were not pleased with, so they kicked it back and asked that the Economic Development Committee take a look at it. We had 2 different meetings. We actually set aside several hours. Robin was our liaison at the time, and we scrubbed the whole thing. We went back to the actual original amendment because it was so redlined to the point where it was too hard, and it was, in our view, for an area that was not going to help Colonial Beach. It might be good for Fairfax or a larger community, but it was not going to help the challenges that we had across the board. We made many recommendations on some ideas of just because of the challenges. We were kind of at this time zone or time frame again. We were going into a busy season. Those were submitted, and if I remember correctly, and I don't know if it was a vote, but I do know that it was decided then by town council that they would take these recommendations and push them back to the planning commission. That's my recollection.
Yeah, and in all fairness, I did not recall it. I actually gave the vice chair some bad information. I did not recall us sending it back, but now that Kelly has refreshed my memory, it's the case. And now that she has refreshed my memory, it was because the EDC had a lot of problems with it. And the council was hoping that you would take a fresh look at it with some of those recommendations and see what accommodations that we could come through with.
So were those recommendations incorporated in here? Because I'm still finding that to be a mysterious list that I personally don't think I've ever seen.
That's correct. That is correct. I think that's part of the issue that we're having, is that, you know, at the time, I don't know, right, who that list was transferred over to. And so it's not I don't have it. I don't have a copy of it. So,
So it seems like we're getting a little
it's almost
stuck.
like we're needing to hear, Planning Commission and myself need to hear, because, you know, not being part of those discussions that were happening at the time at the council meeting, is to understand, like, okay, and I think, you know, we got some very good comments
Yeah.
tonight,
Yeah.
and appreciate those comments. And that's what my thought was, is can we go through and as a group, if it is, you know, we need to start from the old ordinance, or if we need to start from the draft ordinance, or we just need to list out some, here are the comments. That's what I was gonna suggest, is let's start with the list of the numbers of required parking spaces. And what are but I'll defer to Kelly on, you know, what you have and what you're ready to talk about.
Okay, so just a couple of things. One, I'll go back and look. I have it somewhere. I just moved. And so I've got like 6 crates in my office, but I will find it for you. Yeah, and a 6-year-old right now, so, but I will find it for you. Just going back, one of the biggest recommendations that we had was taking Article 13 and looking at really, truly where Colonial Beach is today. Some of these things, as Mike pointed out, are not listed anymore. The types of businesses we have, the requirements between cars, and the additional people we have during our summer season, to just overall where we are in 2020, well, it was 2024, but the idea is that we really need to look at what we are now and look at to what we are in the future. There were some concerns with the landscaping because we are pretty much landlocked as to where we are now. There's not several extra acres laying around for us to have this. We have some flooding issues. We have the Chesapeake Bay Act. There were a lot of factors in here. We had also looked at, and I know this has come up a couple times, the 2022 parking study that the town had paid for. That was done in February during COVID, which if you want to look at a really quiet town, that was the time to look. And there were things suggested that really don't they just are not a benefit as to where we are now. The other thing is that, that was mentioned by Vicky, downtown Colonial Beach was provided a grant, and Timmons has been doing some work. Part of that connectivity is going to have to do with sidewalks and connecting businesses and people. And there will be a piece of parking or how we do that, that I would ask as we go through this, and it's not gonna all be fixed tonight, but that we take some of those other things into consideration. I will say, as a business owner, not being part of the EDC, I was blessed to get a parking lot with my inn, but I'm still short on parking based on these requirements. And there is no other place. So we really need to look at the amount of small businesses we have, the opportunity of growing as a community and bringing more businesses in, how we're going to address some of these challenges. So I'm not against us looking at this, but I think we really need to be, I'm just going to use the word real on what we are, and not look at this as what someday we could be if we had, 500 more acres and, large shopping malls, because that's not what we have, and we will not ever be that.
I think those are excellent comments, and I agree with you. I will say that I do. One of the things that I will say, that the parking text amendment was brought up as part of the ongoing work that the Planning Commission, in conjunction with staff, have been doing throughout the whole ordinance, right? So it was my understanding that, we were going to go through the parking ordinance and clean it up where there may be inconsistencies, define certain terms that may not be defined well, and look at it to see if it, fit currently with certain areas. We had some specific conversations, I know Mr. Howell and I did, relative to the downtown area and how the parking ordinance would likely need to be modified in the downtown area. And I do agree that there was some flexibility that was incorporated into expanding the flexibility in the ordinance to allow reciprocal agreements for parking between uses that didn't have same demands and that kind of thing. And that there was some language that was incorporated that I felt like was good for allowing a certain number or percentage of golf cart parking to count towards the parking numbers, the number of required parking spaces. I don't agree that, I think that I agree with you all that the landscaping requirements are more of a suburban design. They're not typically in a more urban setting like you have downtown. You have more of some hedgerow type parking, or either a combination of some fencing and hedgerow parking. And the reason, and it's not needed everywhere, right? It's not needed necessarily between business and business. But when you're trying to provide a little transition between, like maybe a residential area and a business area, I've seen a hedgerow used, I've seen a fence with some landscaping used. But again, you have to look at the context of that use, that area that's being developed. Now, the ordinance does still allow, as it's proposed, I'm sorry, go ahead and speak, sir. You, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I just had one comment is, with regard to the, this general ordinance thing is, it might be okay to keep something like this for the new development that's supposed to happen across the road if you were gonna do something like that, but not in town. It might be, if you wanted to keep this, I would suggest maybe districting things and having a different parking requirements for different districts in town.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I guess what I would say is that there is an area in the ordinance that is still in there that does allow the zoning administrator, to make, to waive certain landscaping requirements administratively if they don't work, right, in a certain area. You know, the town, and I'm not pretending like I'm standing here telling you what all the answers are. I'm just telling you what some of my thoughts are. And then if that sparks more conversation, then I appreciate that. You know, the town, oftentimes you'll see the alleys that you have in town used so that you can access parking behind buildings. I don't think that that's been utilized enough in town. And there could be all kinds of different reasons. We'd have to look into, like, you know, are there public facilities in the alleys, and does that impede the ability to use them to access parking in the rear? But those are some of the things that I think that are worth talking about. And I will be quiet now. I wanted to tell you why the ordinance changes came about, and, you know, and listen to everyone's input about, you know, no, the whole town should not be subject to a suburban landscaping or parking requirement standard. We do need safe drive aisles and safe parking so that people aren't backing into each other. There are clear pedestrian ways that don't conflict with parking and people trying to get to and from parking. There is a need at times to landscape or provide some sort of screening, if you will, or buffer to minimize the impact of vehicles and glare from vehicles, glare from headlights of vehicles. Those kinds of things are important, but they can be addressed in lots of different ways. So that's all I had to add.
One other comment, we were all about the green space because we all agree that that's part of what makes us beautiful is we have got this gorgeous river and a lot of people walk, they ride their bikes, they like that piece of it. So we all agree that there needs to be something in there, but the way this is currently, anyone in the downtown area is not going to be able to do it. But on the other side of that, we had a really long conversation last April when this was coming up because the town had required STRs, the short-term rentals, so anyone who lives in a home that is using the short-term rental as a business, because now they have to have a business requirement, how that parking is going to be affected, because now you've put a business into a residential neighborhood. And so there was a lot of conversation about that. And I think that's one piece that needs to be addressed, that if you're going to look at this as parking across the board, you're looking at residential for someone who's living in their house and next door is a short-term rental, which technically has now become a business, and what is the requirements for short-term rentals. So that was another discussion. There was no answers to that, Darla. I'm sorry to throw that one into the mix, but there was conversation about that because there were a lot of concerns, and because some areas, and forgive me if I call this wrong, but R1 and R3 or 2, and depending on where your business is located, looking at that and what those requirements are. So there was a lot of conversation on how we kind of fix a lot of these challenges. We talked a lot about shared parking. We have a lot of churches in the downtown area that don't necessarily use their parking lots. Looked at using the trolley and seeing if there was ways that we could use the school parking lot during the summer months when we're so busy to keep some of the parking out of the downtown area, and that we could use shuttle services and whatnot to shuttle people back and forth, so that kind of minimizes the amount of traffic coming through town for those that are in carts or walking or riding their bikes. So we really tried to look at this as an organic thing versus it just being something that was written completely and designated in the statute.
Well, I too found the draft very complex and overly complex, really. And I think that part of that origin came from, I think even Vivian C. Giles, who was our town attorney before Mr. Duggan, and also Don Dooley. And I think that the draft we have in front of us is a result of all of that, for several different processes that we went through for that. There are good things about it, but I think that we can, start with the original and maybe, not utilize this draft, but pull from it some of the resources that we need. I think in many ways, the draft one is overly punitive for new businesses, really. And so we want to follow our motto that's on our comprehensive plan. We want to be friendly to businesses and families and so on. And in many ways, this parking draft ordinance is very punitive. I really like the creative ideas that we can bring to bear on the problem. The idea that is in the draft for utilizing golf carts to count towards the number of parking spaces needed. One of the things, too, I think that resulted from our conversation is that if we do use the golf carts to count towards the number of parking spaces needed, that maybe we look at ways to designate parking areas for golf carts. And as you know, for people in town who drive golf carts, you can take up a whole parking spot where you really don't need to. And so if we had a plan for that, I think that would be exceedingly helpful. And I think that there's so much vacant land around the area that we could utilize in a better way. And municipal parking. I know that there's some areas on Hawthorne and Irving that there's maybe as much as 20 spaces there, but the parking lines have not been put down, so people don't park there, and it's underutilized. So, I think Irving.
North Irving, where the Klotz building, that's how it's always been referred to me as the Klotz parking lot.
Yeah.
Next to the old jail. But that also was one of our discussion topics, was having, and I get very frustrated with this on North Irving, and I sit on the corner of North Irving and Hawthorne, is that whole North Irving area is not striped for parking. And the little bit that is, it's not followed. So a lot of times we lose 2, 3, 4, 5 parking spots because it's not marked. We also need to make sure that we are marking for handicap and considering that into our parking plan. When we opened the Inn in 2017, we were the second hotel in the Northern Neck with an ADA room. I have asked for 5, 7, 8 years now for an ADA parking space to be designated next to the inn because the sidewalk slopes, and I've stopped asking. But my point is that we need to make sure that that is in consideration in a parking plan when you're looking at these streets, to make sure that we best utilize that for those requirements also.
And so I will say that the zoning ordinance won't solve the question of, are there enough handicap spaces along the streets? Because that is part of a public facility that the town manages, right? The zoning ordinance is not going to go in and say, please put a handicapped parking space next to the inn. So all those are important comments, and we'll take those. I just wanted to make sure that we're separating out municipal parking and requirements and all of that, and the zoning ordinance. Now, relative to the zoning ordinance as it relates to the requirements, any other requirements?
Just for color of discussion, can we pull up the zoning map?
I think so.
I've got it on my laptop, but I think
Yeah,
everybody needs to
it
be
would-
looking at this while
Sure.
we're talking about it especially. And then just to throw like an even wider net on historically how the town was planned and how some of the streets were laid out for parking specifically. If you go right across the street to the museum, they've got pictures of Colonial, and it's supposed to be striped on both sides. And it was originally designated not as a double wide promenade, but as parking all the way down both sides. Basically from Napa and the auto parts all the way down, not just past the intersection. So it's something that we can at least encourage that conversation, because it's a really low threshold to be able to help with that identification. But also, we're talking about, a lot of off-street is what the focus of the parking is, but in order to get the density and the walkability, we have to be able to adequately provide and utilize our historic resources like Colonial.
Yeah, yes.
I did not know that. I just want to make a comment about golf cart parking. I mean, that seems to be one thing that, in spite of our parking ordinance, is happening, right? Like there's golf cart parking by the beach now that's not taking, so they're not taking up a whole car space. And there's golf cart parking at the ice house that's specifically for carts, so a lot of carts can get in there and it doesn't mess with the cars. So that's sort of mushrooming now, anyway.
In the context of new business and encouraging people to add businesses and develop their existing facilities, definitely need to, I believe that at least from a zoning perspective and the way that we're talking about trying to make this integrated and harmonious, we really have to look at the different districts in town and address them individually, because RC and CR, where we're at here, is different than what we're gonna want down in C1, either all the way down at the end or, going down Colonial over to, because we have the alley access and we have the zero setbacks and we have the additional availability of the parking on Colonial Avenue, along with two large shopping centers that are wholly underutilized, right? So the idea is to, try and get as much juice for the squeeze as we possibly can. I'd like a clean copy also, because the red line is
Yeah.
So
eye-watering.
in your packet, there are two versions, and so I can give you, I didn't give you yet, but I can. There is the existing ordinance
Yes.
in the packet, and then the red line version. I can give you a clean copy of the
Red line.
draft,
Yes.
if you'd like.
Yes,
Please.
please.
Okay, I will send that out to you all.
Okay, but as a point of order, if we're all somewhat in agreement and the input that it is coming at us, how do we structure this so that we can address, in light of this being a separate parking ordinance versus the actual zoning designation ordinance, these differences that we're trying to encourage, actually, between, RC versus C1, without having the back and forth like we were just using the example of landscaping, right? So landscaping is supposed to be landscaping, but it's not. And parking is supposed to be parking, but it's not.
Right. There can be different standards for different districts. That's not uncommon.
Right.
Right? So, like the RC district, versus C1, as you spoke to earlier.
So would we break that down? What I'm guessing structurally, would we break that down in Article 13 and say, and parking is RC in CR and C1 and R1 and R2, since we're encompassing the STRs and all of
Yes.
these things? Okay.
So we would have some common standards, and where those standards are the same,
Yes.
right, they would all be together. But then as they break out, you would have different standards for a different area. They can be district-wide, right? For like the whole RC district, they could be identified, as a different area within the RC. right? I don't know that we need to break it down that much, but it can be. So yes, it could definitely be broken down
Okay.
to respect the different areas of town.
And that was one of the things that we had talked about, because again, 2 years ago, you know, even though it's been a little bit longer than 2 years, but downtown Colonial Beach was really kind of ramping up about a year and a half, 2 years ago. So that was one of the conversations we had, was looking at the different, I guess, districts, of looking at what the requirements are. And if you, as Vicki mentioned, Virginia Main Street acknowledged Colonial Avenue to be part of our downtown now. So if you really look at what our business corridor is, I think you could make it so that it matches kind of what that is, and then you've got the other districts. The other thing we talked about was like special event parking. Like if you've got events, because we know that we have those several times throughout the year, that there be not necessarily, and Darla, forgive me if this doesn't belong in zoning, but then that if you're getting a permit or you're looking at doing something like that, that there would be verbiage written for that, so it doesn't impact the day-to-day that's happening, and that there is event parking, like if it's in one of the fields or the school or the something, right? Versus what everybody else in the golf cart and the beach people and whatnot, so.
So you mean like the things that happen on Town Hill, those kind of special events?
And the Bike Fest and all these special events, right?
Right, so like, I'll just take July 4th. We
Okay.
end up with 20,000 extra people in. So to keep our main streets usable, and especially when people go to leave, that a lot of that parking is not concentrated in downtown, and it's not on people's front yards because they're trying to park in very narrow streets. It would be that there would be designated parking area. If that's the part of the riverboat, or if that's at the school, or if that's the shopping center, if that's Food Lion or whatnot, but the idea was to make that so that it didn't affect so much of the people living at the point, or emergency vehicles, et cetera. So that was part of our conversation at one point also.
Just to throw something in that I've seen other municipalities use, and that's why the idea of parking along Colonial. Chincoteague, for instance, has trolley stops, right? But they're designated trolley stops. And so one of the problems that people have is, well, they can't park right in front of the place they want to be. But during those heavy activity weekends, the trolley could be far more utilized than it is. I hate to admit it, I've been here 8 years and I've never ridden it, okay?
It's actually kind of fun.
And
It's
I'm sure it
cute.
is. And the other part is the shuttle parking, or a shuttle from, one of the parking lots or what have you. Because, and Rock Hall, Maryland does that, where they're a little town, they exist only for their pirate festival. But it's a town of like 300 people, that gets 4,000 people in on one weekend. And it's amazing how well it works by simply using the shuttles leaving from schools and so forth and so on. So thanks for that input, Kelly. That's,
We were trying to think smart in how we do this day to day and how it affects all of us. I come from outside of town because I don't live in town. And when I can't get down the street to my business, it's a little bit of a challenge. Or when it's, end of 4th of July and the fireworks were lovely and it takes me 2 hours to get 2 miles. Again, people are just cranky, it's hot, so we were trying to come up with some ideas that would help alleviate that, and to make it so that people want to come back and they don't go, oh, good God, it took me 4 days to get out of town. That was our thought process.
I don't know if folks remember, but 2 or 3 years ago, Jackie Stewart did a rendering of what it would look like for parking on Colonial Avenue. And it was so charming. She had developed, I guess pull-ins, and then a swell, if you will, that came out where you could plant trees. And the rendering was just wonderful. So I think that's something that we should include in our discussion as well.
And again, there's nothing that prevents that type of design on Colonial Avenue. The zoning ordinance doesn't regulate parking along public streets
Right,
at all.
yeah.
And so I assume that the challenge we're creating is actually in preventing new businesses from starting. If we're requiring a restaurant to have a parking space for every 4 seats plus a parking space for every 2 employees, if somebody wants to convert some building on Hawthorne into a restaurant, they've got a real problem in having enough parking spaces. You'll probably remember when people were looking at what to do with the current town offices, that presentation that the consultants did demonstrated that there aren't, according to the code as it currently exists in Colonial Beach, there aren't enough parking spaces at the town offices. If that's the case, because it seems to me the town offices sort of function, and there sort of seems to be enough parking for the town offices, it suggests to me that maybe there's something wrong with the ordinance if they wanted to rebuild the town offices there, that there then isn't enough parking. So I think there are some challenges that need to be looked at but our focus, I think, has to be on that zoning. Are we being too restrictive on an office building on that plot with a number of parking spaces? Or how can parking spaces be designated? Why are we requiring that? I think it's great if all parking is within 500 feet of where I intend to visit, but maybe I could cope with it being 600 feet if I really wanted to go there. So why are we, doing some things like that? Could we be more constructive in what we're looking at here?
So one of the things we did talk about that, because there was concern with Durfton Muse being there and with building those townhomes, and how are we going to get everybody in there? Because High Tides pretty much has no parking to meet the amount of tables that they have between those 2 places. So one of the conversations we had was if there was designated parking, like if you go to the end of Taylor Street where that huge grassy field thing is next to the gravel parking lot next to Riverboat, I don't know what that's all called, but having some form of shuttle service for employees or people that would have to park away, because technically, I don't even meet these requirements. I think if we're really going to, if you are all really going to look at this, again, we have to look at what we currently are, because I don't think anybody really meets these, at least in our downtown area.
So I would say to you that the ordinance itself, lots of the businesses and things the buildings have been there for a long time. There's been, obviously, there are no parking spaces unless they've been torn up and a different building built over time. So, I think the ordinance, certainly wouldn't go into the existing businesses and say, guess what? You have to. Now, we did work with, recently, the Magnolia building, the shops there on Washington. That was the newest one that I worked on that has the commercial space and then an apartment upstairs. And so they built a few spaces around back. They had existing, some existing surfacing and everything, and they had access through the alley. So we worked with them to use that existing service. I think they resurfaced it with gravel. And then they designated a space handicapped in the back behind the building because there wasn't one within a reasonable distance along Washington. But they were able to move into that existing building, accommodate the commercial use and the apartments by building, I think it's 3 spaces they built out back, or designated. I won't say that they built them because they re-gravelled them. but they designated them, made a minor change to the side of the building so that they'd have handicapped access from this back to the front. We did not get into landscaping requirements. I made a decision as the zoning administrator that it's behind the building, right? It's a small number of spaces, it won't have an impact, so we didn't go there. So that worked. So I just wanted to give you an example of it will work. It's not that it never works. It can work. And when I say that, it's based on the ordinance requirements. The other thing to think about is, as Mr. Long said, is, a business won't be, or a restaurant won't be able to put in blank spaces and so many for employees and things. That's one of the reasons why we were trying to have as much flexibility to allow the ability to count on-street parking, as you said. Maybe we need to look at that distance to see how far is reasonable to ask people to walk, right? And then also allowing the reciprocal parking. So if there's a business that's open more during the day and the restaurant has more business at night, to be able to work out that agreement.
But so far, we haven't done that anywhere, right?
We do that, we have done that as far as allowing on-street parking to count. We have not done it relative to, that I've seen. Now, there may be some agreements out there that I don't know about, but we want to allow that as an option.
I just had a quick idea, regarding parking in the immediate time, since now the town owns there we go. Since, the town now owns wherever that motel, that lot.
The town owns which lot?
With the-
Colonial.
Yeah,
Okay.
using that for 4th of July and charging parking. It's probably too late to do it for this weekend, but using that since I don't see it being utilized in the foreseeable future.
Yeah.
So for just for some context on 500 linear feet, I just pulled up Google Earth and just for gee whiz, from here, 500 feet down Hawthorne will get you all the way to the other side of the inn. If you head north, it will get you all the way to the brewery. And then if you head to the west, it will get you basically all the way to the church, all the way down the block. So that's 500 feet it's a reasonable distance. And on any given building in the resort commercial area, it can almost encompass most of the RC.
Wow.
Just for scale, since we're talking about 500 feet as an arbitrary distance.
Did you find the sheet? I wrote it. I'm sorry, I wrote it. Is everybody's name on that sheet I wrote? Yeah, everybody that, the new people, yeah, okay, because I was gonna get the planning commissioners and staff to sign the sheet. We have a sign-in sheet like we did before for the other work session. I want to make sure that we capture everyone that's here. Any other comments that you all have? Thoughts? I'm going to send you all the clean version of the draft because the, marked up version is very confusing. I think there was some discussion about, we'll let you use that as the draft. We have a couple of action things. You're gonna look for the Economic Development Committee's comments. I'm gonna send out the clean draft version. And then there was a little discussion at the beginning about where do we start, right? Do we start from the old ordinance and move forward? Do we, you know, wanted to hear what y'all thought about that.
Well, when you call it the old ordinance, that's the existing ordinance,
Yes, sir.
isn't it?
That's from
current.
2020, is that
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
current.
Yeah.
So,
This
No.
one, right, that was in our packet?
The one in your packet, the first one
Right.
in your packet that's not marked up, right?
so I think we have, I would have thought that we have to start from there, because that's the ordinance that applies today to businesses in town. I would have thought that it's a question of improved ways of modifying that over what was suggested in the marked up version, as opposed to starting off with a marked up version, which is not, doesn't exist as a real document anyway. That would be my thought.
I like the idea of going back to the draft, or the original is what
The
I'm trying to say.
original.
The original. And just the fact that, you know, we've got a lot of good things that are in the draft that we can incorporate. Things like, you know, allowing golf carts to be counted and giving flexibility to the zoning administrator to approve exceptions. And that there's built-in flexibilities, I think, in the draft that we want to include in the original.
I'd also like some information about where the number of parking spaces required values, or what would be a good source to use, in addition to what we have existing.
So I don't know where the numbers came from in the current ordinance. I know there are some, you know, standard sort of
Where
national.
would be some, yeah,
Right.
so like, at least generally, where
Where
does that
should we
standard
go to look
language
for?
originate? And then, because that's really, flexibility stems from this table, right? So the table is the baseline, and how flexible we are from this table is the deviation from the standard. So if we look at how we set that standard, we could inherently reduce the amount of flexibility required in the long run if we already build that into the standard. So just looking at, you know, do we really need, or can we synthesize this table for the different zoning districts? Or at least look at it that way, and as this is the core of the ordinance. And building from the table, I think, is a great place to start, because it gives us a focus. And then we can determine whether or not we need to adjust the table for the different zones, or if we need to just expand it and make it more universal and comprehensive. And then, once we're comfortable with where the table is, then talk about what are the circumstances under which we would deviate from that, or where are those special allowances going to come in.
Can I just comment? Robin had us go back when we did this last year to what is in your packet. It's your Article 13 is from 2020. That's what she had us work off of. So that's where our comments came from. And I will just say, and I think Mike gave you, Mr. Howell, some of his notes. That was one of the comments that we had too, is that we needed to have an updated version of the businesses we have today added into that. So I will ask if you all will take that into consideration. I know there were some of those businesses that are still part of this that we don't have gambling halls per se, but those affect many of the ordinances, so to pull some of the verbiage out of there didn't work. So I think if we could just add in what we currently have and then look at that as part of what those requirements are. And every business is going to have different requirements. I just hope that you can just remember that a lot of us, the majority of our businesses are small and family-owned, so.
Well, that's the idea, is to not make it overly burdensome.
Right.
And that's where that flexibility comes in. And what about those reciprocal and adjacent agreements? And what can we do with, you know, is 500 feet enough? Is 1,000 feet enough? What, you know, where is that flexibility needed? But we have to have a baseline.
Correct. And that's what we talked about also. And again, kind of the different zones or districts, as you may want to refer to them, are going to have different requirements. But again, going back to STRs, if the town is going to make them businesses and it's in a residential neighborhood, that will need to eventually be, I would think, addressed, because you've got a business in residential, and if you're requiring them to follow commercial requirements in part of that zoning, it's going to affect those in those neighborhoods. And
Yeah.
we
So-
talked a lot about that actually for a
Yeah,
while.
and actually, I think some of that discussion, I'm trying to remember when the short-term rental ordinance was adopted. Currently, there's no minimum requirement for a short-term rental. What we do, so the ordinance is written for short-term rentals, it's in Article 18 of the zoning ordinance. It requires that a short-term rental, well, let me rephrase that. It encourages short-term rentals to provide ample parking off-street. But there's some places where there is no off-street parking in residential areas. So that was some of the discussion we had with the short-term rental committee, is to take a step back from actually saying thou shalt provide, a parking lot for every 2 people that are gonna stay at the short-term rental. Obviously, it's a house, so you have to have 2. That's a minimum, you have to have 2. But, to also allow, the flexibility to allow, some on-street parking to count towards that. Well, but I do get complaints. We get complaints about people from short-term rentals parking boats and things, golf carts, in the street. And then the other residences on the street can't feel comfortable getting in and out, so.
That was one other thing that we kind of touched on. Thank you for saying the golf cart piece, that if we're going to promote Colonial Beach as a golf cart community, are we going to make some areas golf cart driven only? We had talked a little bit about that and how that would affect. So if you take, just say Taylor Street, part of Hawthorne and Taylor, and you turn them into golf cart only and no vehicles, how does that affect the business owners and parking, and looking at that also, the requirements of along the beach on Irving and down and around some of that, because it goes from the beach into residential areas. So we also talked about how that would affect if we made some streets non-vehicle use, but golf cart usage. So something to consider also as we grow, and maybe if some of those streets are golf cart only, which would be a pain at times, but if we made them golf cart only, it might limit some of the challenges we have with parking. So,
A frequent urban redevelopment strategy is exactly that, except it's the pedestrian promenade is what the focus. So
Yeah.
the equivalent here would be, so you know how we have the wine walk, right? That make that whole area pedestrian seasonally, or whatever that looks like, as a way to, artificially induce that. And then, okay, well, if that pushes everybody out of that core, obviously we would want to encourage density and activity and things like that to make that a vibrant, viable solution. So where are all these people going to park that are going to come to this? Potentially just throwing out how wide can we push this, and then come back to, what's going to be reasonable.
right, and again, not to overwhelm all of you, because I know this is the zoning ordinance, but we were just trying to think strategically of how, our town buzzes between March and April through, October, November. And the Economic Development Committee has spent a lot of time trying to figure out how we can extend so we have people coming in through the winter months, not like we do in the summer months, but having some of those options of pushing economic development and these businesses staying open all year round, so that we don't become just a summer resort town. So we tried to really look at it holistically, and to see how we can make that so that we're following the rules, but also being, somewhat creative and being a draw to people that want to come and spend their money here and live here.
So I have a question, and I guess certainly everybody keep providing your input. We're getting close to 7:30. I don't know if y'all want to begin thinking about wrapping up, or if you have a lot more comments to make, but I've heard, right, in the parking study, I think, defined or established, and I hear people say, the town does not have enough parking spaces. And is that I would say it's not every day, obviously, right? If it's in the winter, there's not a parking problem. So when are the parking problems? Is it, as soon as season hits in May and there's a parking problem? Is it a weekend parking problem? Is it a festival parking problem? How would you define it, if y'all had to define it? When is the town lacking parking?
I guess I'll just start. And then
Sure.
people can play devil's advocate, right? From my perspective, it's all of the weekends during the season and all of the festival weekends and the 4th of July. You did bring up the 4th of July, which is insane in terms of parking or driving around. But I think it's more seasonal.
And I think it's based on the area too. So if you're going to high tides, for example, where there's almost no parking, then, so we have to think of the problems as, where we see the highest demand for parking during the on-season and look at whether or not we could, look at creating, a special district or whatever for each of those. And that's why it's important to separate it out from everything else.
But it also feels to me like there's some really good action items that have come out of this, which granted are not things you're gonna write into the ordinance, but, if you did organize the special events so that you were taking advantage of the trolley and you're parking them over at the school, that kind of takes away a lot of those cars, and sort of cleans that up and hopefully makes all of that flow a lot better. So, or taking advantage of Colonial Avenue. Like, I never heard that before, that they were supposed to be parking all the way up and down that. Just those little things, if everything was marked, it seems like it would be better.
But another,
Any other comments about parking shortages?
it's incorporated in that. It's making sure that our parking ordinance isn't prohibitive for new businesses or businesses that are trying to open or relocate in town. Because, as has been mentioned multiple times, the existing ones would not conform to our current regulations.
So I would go,
Only person that'll be able to read these when we get back.
is you. So, yeah, I was gonna go back to that, so yeah, it is 7:30, and, in addition to getting the comments from the Economic Committee and the comments from the guy who spoke, earlier, it would also be nice to get these comments,
Yes, ma'am.
and,
I'll do a summary like I did for the FAR meeting.
yeah. I mean, because based on that, I think some of these things will gel together.
So I think
Anybody else have any
well,
comments?
it's important, I think, for us to know where we're gonna start on that. So I like the suggestion that Nathan made for looking at the table and using that as a starting place, just so that we have, just a good, clear, direction of what we're going to be doing. So is there any thought on how we should approach that? Is that an agreement, or? Yeah.
It was my suggestion.
I think.
Of course, I'm gonna agree with it, but
I'm looking to the other side of the room there.
Okay, so I would be happy to do, if you want the planning commission members to do some work on this prior to the next meeting, I think it would be important to spell out what we do so we use our time efficiently. I'm not against doing that, Or would it be better if your department comes up with some suggestions on what we should be looking at so that we have something to look at prior to the next meeting? I mean, how do we get to the next step?
And so I would like to, before we talk about this again, right, I would like to get the comments from economic development to make sure that we all have them and we can share them. So, whenever we can get them, so if we get them in time to put on the next agenda, we'll put parking discussion. If it takes a little bit longer, then we'll put it on for the next month. There's really nothing about our current ordinance to me except for some of the missing flexibility that, is there. I mean, I think there's flexibility with landscaping, there's flexibility with the 500 feet and allowing parking to count towards that. Some of the other flexibility, like letting golf cart count towards, regular parking and stuff, it's not adopted yet. So, any delay that we take, there's some of those things that won't kick in yet, but I think that's all for a good cause, because we need to talk about the different parking areas. I think that's really, gonna help, educate the rest of our discussion about the ordinance and what those standards might be. So, if I get the economic development comments, I will share them. I'm gonna share with you all the clean draft of the clean version of the draft ordinance. And then I will look for some typical sites that have been recognized as being accurate or providing good information relative to uses and how many parking spaces should be needed for those types of uses. And I'll share that with you all. In the meantime, I think from a staff standpoint, you all are welcome if you want to look through like some of that information. But I think maybe what I'll do is from a staff standpoint, kind of compile all that and bring it back to you. And then we could have some additional conversation and, maybe even a planning commission work session to go through some of that detail and make sure we're all on the same page, unless you all have different ideas or things that you want to try to tackle.
I think that sounds good. But that addresses your question.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank y'all so much. That's all I had, unless y'all have anything else on this.
No, I don't have anything else. Now what am I supposed to do?
So there's number
Oh,
10, yeah.
Number 10. Community Development and Zoning Director comment. I think that's you.
Yeah.
She is our planning tech in the office, and so she's joining us for the planning commission meetings. I think we met Tyler back there. Y'all met Charlotte.
Hey, Tyler.
Charlotte, Charlotte?
Yeah.
Charlotte, the economic development
Mm-hmm.
person? Okay.
We
All
did.
right, I don't have any announcements.
Oh,
Or comments.
would anyone like to make a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay, we are adjourned.
Thank you. Good job. Good job.